Join us on this journey as we explore the battles fought and the victories earned, uncovering the incredible impact these stories have had on our world. Welcome to the Battle Between podcast, where every story is a battle and every battle tells a story.
What's going on, guys? This is your host here, Jeff Skinner, with the Battle Between podcast, and I got a great friend of mine here today with us named Rick Johnson here. He's an extraordinary guest that has basically nothing short of just a powerful story. You know, Rick, you ran away from home. You addicted at a very young age. You went from punk rock to homeless to the U.S. Army, LAOC, punk rock scene. We're going to dig into that, right? After the Army, you got into sobriety and service in the community. You're an amazing real estate professional. Worked in some of the same areas I did in the LA Hollywood scene. So you got a pretty cool story, man. So, you know, I want to first start by asking you, how the hell's your day going, man? Let's start there.
I had a closing today.
Nice. Where
sold a house, McClendon Chisholm, just down the road.
Very cool.
Sonoma Verde. You know, these are clients that I met through my service work.
Yeah.
Meals on Wheels.
Very cool.
You know, and that's kind of my flex is, you know, my service work can bleed over into my business, but I don't market myself that way. It's organic.
I think a lot of the real relationships come that way.
Right. And, you know, people find out because, you know, everybody asks, hey, what do you do? What do you do? You know, and it goes back and forth. And, you know, when people find out that I do real estate with you know, the way the market's been and, you know, it's kind of on everybody's mind. You know, what's my house worth?
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to try and buy a house for the first time or whatever it is. So it's always a hot topic. It's always in the papers. It's always on the news. Everybody's always talking about it. So it's one of those things where when someone says, oh my God, you do real estate, what's the market like?
Oh, it just opens up a floodgate of questions.
Yeah. And then, you know, people may dive in and go see my bio on Zillow or something like that. And then they get back to me and they go, oh my God, you're a cancer survivor. You know, I mean, they kind of, it opens up all these other avenues to talk about stuff. And, and it always ends up being, hey, can I buy you a drink? You know, and I'm like, well, let's talk about that. You know, I've been sober for 32 years and
that's insane.
You know, and then that opens up another door. And I can tell you this, my clients today, as an example, I was wearing a Casa shirt on, you know, one of the walkthroughs that we did at the house. And they're like, hey, what's that? You know, and I got to tell my story about being adopted and, you know, having been in foster care and, you know, and suffering from abuse myself. And that's why I'm passionate about CASA, which is a court-appointed special advocate.
Yep.
You know, so when a kid gets abused and gets put into the system, our volunteers go in and follow them through the system.
You know, that's an insane program, man, because I never knew anything about that program, even as a child going,
right.
You know, being in that world and in that system, there was never any education on that as a kid in that system, man.
At all, yeah.
Let's talk about being a kid. 16 years old, man, in the punk rock scene. 78 to 81, 82, you said?
Well, yeah, I mean, 78 until now. I mean, you know, but
you were in the punk rock scene before I was born.
It's really funny because, you know, I was into, you know, I wouldn't say heavy metal bands, but like Led Zeppelin and Blue Oyster Cult and, you know, stuff like that. And, you know, I'd heard of the Ramones and the Sex Pistols, you know, because that was a little more mainstream. But this friend of mine, Dave Keys, we became friends and through high school. Yeah. And him and I we went over to this old sanitarium where this guy named Willie Hampkins, God rest his soul if he's gone, but I don't know where he is. He was kind of a really trippy dude, right? And that's where we'd go buy drugs.
That's where you get it from, the trippy dudes.
Shrooms, acid, you know, the good stuff. You know, weed you can get anywhere. But this guy had the good stuff. And so we'd go over there and, you know, and he'd play these weird albums. I mean, just trippy shit. And I was just like, wow, this is a little much for me. But then he put on a Cramps album.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And I was just like, oh, man.
Fall in love?
Yeah, and that's kind of when the crossover happened.
Okay.
I was always a little off, let's just say.
Uh-huh.
And it's the ADD, daydreamer, whatever you want to call it.
Gotcha.
You know, I'm, you know, people will tell me, man, you're really smart. And I'm like, man, it took me 5 years to get through high school, bro. And it's that attention deficit shit. I just, you know.
It goes way back.
Well, I could not show up to class and then study for the test and pass the test.
Ooh, okay.
But I wouldn't get any credit for anything else. So my grades are always D's and C's.
That's all right, man. Some people say that's a passing grade.
Well, and that, you know, that's the way I looked at it, you know. My parents, not so much, but.
So what's the Agent Orange story about? How'd you get involved with those guys? You're a roadie for them, weren't you?
Yeah. So this is later on when after I got sober.
Yeah. That was probably difficult.
One of my childhood friends, Sam Boley, was actually playing bass for them, which is really odd because he's got really long hair and he's like a classical violinist and played the bassoon and you know, he was always in orchestra and band in school, but he was a really cool dude. Mm-hmm. And he ended up playing bass for them. And so I connected through him and ended up doing a U.S. tour as a roadie for Agent Orange.
Tell me what that's like, because I'm a musician myself, but I never saw it from the roadie side. I saw it from the stage side, the drug side, the alcohol side, the fun side. What's the roadie side like?
The roadie side is a trip because you get to experience the whole thing without having to perform. You know, you load in, load out, you set up, break down.
Yep.
And the rest of the time, you know, you're either sleeping back in the hotel room because you're going to drive all night, or while the band's playing, or you hang out and But after 5 or 6 gigs, you're like, man, I don't want to hear this crap anymore.
It's a beating,
Yeah, and not that it's crap because I love the band, but so what I started doing is just hanging out with the kids, you know, and mixing with the groupies, so to speak, and. You know, and when you're doing nightclubs versus arenas, nightclubs, you never know what the contract writer is going to get you. You know, a contract writer is the management team sends that out to all the clubs, and you get a dinner. Some bands want tube socks, underwear, T-shirts because when they're they just want to throw that nasty stuff out.
It's gross,
And so you never know what you're going to get fed. Because you're in this, the kind of shithole bars across.
You eat what
nation.
you can. Bar peanuts and beer.
Yeah, and then there's always a trailer band that you pick up along the way that plays 3 or 4 gigs because they're from the region.
Yeah.
So you get to meet all these other cool bands. I mean, it's not like, Metallica and Pantera.
Totally different.
Doing
gigs.
A full tour.
Yeah.
It's Agent Orange, and then like for example, this band Noodle that we met in Florida, and they were from Austin.
I heard you talk about them before.
They're the fucking coolest guys, right? But they weren't getting any money. So, we were getting paid okay. And so we'd buy them, we had like 5 gigs together. We'd give them the leftovers from the food and pay for some of their gas. And they became, I don't want to say lifelong, but we stayed in touch for almost 20 years after that.
Man, I tell you that lifestyle on the road, man, and I didn't really road trip much, LA, Vegas, Hollywood, San Diego, but when you're based in San Diego, that's a quick road trip, 3 hours, 4 hours, man. So, but man, we drink and smoke all of our profits, man. So we didn't do much with it. It was something else that left us kind of hopeless at the end of the day. Let me ask you, when you're 16 at what point did you find yourself in a hopeless position?
Well, full-blown alcoholic by the age of 16.
Yeah.
Doing drugs, you name it, I put it in my body, and I got popped on a felony.
Wow,
and,
that's big.
I'm not going to go into the details of that. That record is sealed in L.A. County somewhere. But it really put a damper on my childhood.
Man,
and so I ended up in probation, and I was lucky. I ended up not having to go to juvie, and they kind of coached the victim into dropping some of the charges down a little bit due to my age and my.
Did you serve some time for that?
No, I didn't. I did community service.
Oh man, Grass Ninja?
Which is I had to actually wash police cars in Sierra Madre, California, where I'm from.
Yep.
And and of course I carved my gang name and all sorts of shit in the wheel wells. So
tell us what your game name was.
Sweaty. Yeah.
That almost fits on your knuckles.
Yeah. Well, I did have it on my arm. I had that removed, but it was SWE Anarchy A TTY.
Yeah.
So I got the anarchy in there.
So when Sweaty was 16, you were addicted. Tell me a little bit about how that went from, let's kind of fast forward because we're going to go back into that whole section there, but give me the journey from like punk rock to Army to real estate gangster. Like share how that looked for you.
The punk rock was being adopted.
Yeah.
Okay. You never feel like you fit in, regardless of how wonderful these people are, which is Dick and Elva Johnson, my parents.
Just an outsider, huh?
Great people. I have 3 wonderful sisters and a great younger brother, but you just don't fit in, man. You don't. And so the drugs and the alcohol made me feel, and I wasn't always 6'2" and good looking.
Yeah.
I was kind of a shrimpy, skinny guy.
I've seen the pictures
with buck teeth. And so, the drugs and the alcohol fueled that, but then the punk rock was a place to release all that angst and anger and resentment and anti-authoritarian and with my parents, my mom was a no nonsense broad, and she said, "Get the fuck out of my house."
Wow.
So I packed my shit, and my sister dropped me off at Dave Key's house where I stored my shit because his dad had passed away and his mom was pretty cool.
How old were you at that time?
16.
Wow.
So, I just turned 17.
Right at that cusp, huh?
And I'd been grounded, so I hadn't been out in a while because of the.
Oh, you were ready to release.
So I was
release the demons.
Off and running, right?
Yeah.
And Hollywood was calling, so I'd take off to Hollywood for 2-3 weeks at a time.
Damn.
And come back and I could hang out at Dave Key's house and take a shower and.
Yeah. Just
and
a nomad.
I'd filter back into school for a few days, and then boom, I'd take off again, and that went on and until I got out of my junior year, and from the turbulence from all of that, my PO had recommended, and I got another buddy, Tony Morrison, that was a punk at the time too.
For the listeners, that's a parole officer.
Yeah. And so Tony Tony and I were going to join the Army a year before I did.
Yeah.
But they had changed the rules that you have to have your high school diploma to go into a specialty.
Okay.
And I'm an idiot when it comes to classroom shit, but when I take these, when I took the ASVAB, I maxed it.
Wow.
So, going infantry wasn't really a choice for me. I wanted to do something. I did have the wherewithal to, become a satellite repairman or something, but they changed the rule that if you didn't have your high school diploma, you had to go infantry. So I said, fuck it, I'll go back and get my
finish school. Yeah.
And so my PO said, hey, if you can finish high school and it was great because I had flunked 10th grade during that bad time.
Oh, that's where the 5th year come in.
Yeah. And I didn't really flunk. I had the credits. So my senior year, I was 18 and I took minimal classes. Mm-hmm. But I played on the golf team. I was this world-class golfer too.
Yeah, we're gonna go into that.
Yeah. But anyway, so when I graduated, I got the old PO and the mom talk. My dad was just like, hey,
whatever, man.
He was kind of hands off because he was kind of a knucklehead when he was around that age, and so he was kind of letting me be me. Whereas my mom was like, hey, what are you gonna do now? Are you going to go to school? Or are you going to get a job? And I was like,
must be a mom and dad difference.
I'm going to party all summer was
for sure
what I was thinking. And she goes, no, you're not. You got to do something. And so I went down and, swore in. And
you're 18 at this point?
Yeah. And I didn't have to take the ASVAB again. So,
because you already took it.
Yeah. And I went in as a medic.
Man, so 16, heavily addicted, 17 on the streets, 18 in the Army.
Yeah.
What year was that?
That was 81.
81.
And that was towards the end of the 78 to 81 punk rock scene.
Yeah.
And when I joined the Army and went in, it kind of shifted after that. Like a lot of my friends were from all over Southern California, but the OC punks and the LA punks didn't get along. but there was a little bit of crossover. But when I got out of the Army, man, it was all different gangs. So like I'd have guys in FFF, and I'd have, guys in the family, guys in the lads, guys in suicidal. I mean, it was just like, what the fuck happened?
I don't think people understand that the music scene in that time and in that area, it was like a gang war. I mean, I remember seeing pictures of you jumping off stages, and that was pretty fucking cool.
Yeah. And and that mindset going into the Army was great because, they'd say, as a medic, they'd say, hey, Doc, do you want to go rappel out of a helicopter? Hey, Doc, we're going on mountain training. Do you want to go? Hey, Doc, do you want to, do this? Do you want to shoot the, whatever? I mean, I shot every damn weapon where most medics would just chill in the,
That's what I remember about the medics.
In the ambulance. Not me, man. I was out there throwing grenades and shit,
That's the good shit. Did you have a good time in the Army?
I did.
How many years did you do?
I did 3.
3 years?
Yeah, and here's the thing about that. Being trained as a medic was great. And I had, and I'll shout out to Specialist Pat Pettis and Sergeant Gino Cox and Specialist Charles.
Some of your brothers?
Yeah, those were my mentors that said,
Brad,
you need to chill on the drinking
while you're
a little bit, and let's teach you some skills. And so, I learned a ton. I was in an air cav unit.
Okay.
Which is, they're forward,
that's
scouts.
a forward deployed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We had 2 ground troops, 2 air troops, Cobra helicopters and observation helicopters. So I got to do a lot of shit that was, way beyond what, my recruiter, and as we all know, recruiters will tell you pretty much anything to get you through the door.
Shit. That's what they are.
He's like, oh, you're going to be you're going to work in a hospital somewhere. Man, I saw the hospital for 2 weeks on a little training deal.
Yeah.
And that was the cool thing.
Guys like us who served, who actually did a lot of cool stuff and saw a lot of cool places. Then you got the opposite of that, where you got the guy who was like, man, I just sat at a desk for 4 years. They served. There's respect there, but they wish that they did the things that we did. Like 4 years for me, 3 years for you. I had 13 countries in 2 combat zones. I was like you. I was like the guy that was like, hey, I did not join the Marine Corps to sit at a fucking desk. Send me the fuck out to somewhere. You know what I mean?
And that was my mentality is, they all, everybody tells you don't volunteer for anything. Bullshit.
Yeah.
If someone said, hey, we're going to go on a night maneuver and we're going to hump all night, I'm like, let's go.
Yeah. Let's do it.
I don't, I'm not the guy that just wants to sit around and not learn. And the other side of that is like, we had some really great PAs, physician's assistants.
Okay.
And they're part of our unit. If we needed doctors, you had to go to the hospitals. But the PAs would go, hey, do you want to help suture this guy up? Do you want to do minor surgery on this guy? Do you want to put a cast on? Whatever it was. Wow. And I'm like, and that was the cav medic mentality is that if we're going to go, overseas or into a combat situation, we want you guys ready.
You got to be.
And a lot of those guys that I served with had been Vietnam vets. This was
what a special
1981. So a lot of those guys were just finishing up, their 20 or 30. So those guys had a lot of knowledge and were able to pass that along to me.
Oh, you just sort of a sponge at that point then, huh?
Yeah. So, I learned a great skill.
What do you think you took away the most from your service?
My attitude towards other people from around the country, number one.
Makes sense.
People of other races, number 2. And number 3, serving my country, most importantly.
It's a damn good feeling.
Yeah, and that wasn't my thought going in was, I'm going to go serve my country.
Yeah.
That was like one of the last things on my mind. It was, I'm getting away from the drugs, the alcohol, and get the heat off. Now, unfortunately, during that time of service, we were coming out of the Vietnam era, and they couldn't get people to join.
Man, those people were
so a lot of judges and probation officers and parole officers were guiding people into the military.
Is that the word they use? It guiding?
Yeah. Demanding, maybe. Yeah. And so those units that I were in were just full of, I don't want to say criminals, but for lack of a better term, and I'm one of them.
It happens.
So the mentality in the barracks at that time was there was a lot of drugs, and I hate saying this because it's our government, but they weren't piss testing at that time. So you could pretty much do whatever you wanted and not get in trouble unless you got caught with it on you.
That's always the case though, right?
Well, and then they bring the dogs through and, but.
You've said that word knucklehead to me since I've met you.
Yeah.
We've known each other now for years, man. And a knucklehead is a Marine Corps term. So I relate to being a knucklehead myself. When you think back to that time where you were being a knucklehead, like in your worst, rock bottom, what were you thinking? And then what clicked? Like the worst of the worst moments.
Yeah. Do you mean before sobriety?
Yeah, man. Like when you were,
what crossed me over into sobriety?
Well, I guess when you were being a knucklehead, what were you thinking? What was your mindset? Just like, fuck the world, or?
Yeah. Part of it, the punk rock thing was I finally fit in.
Yeah.
There was a bunch of misfits that I ran with.
Okay.
Knuckleheads.
Yep.
Most of them were intelligent, but had come from fucked up, broken families.
How does that term come from? A gang? Knucklehead?
No, my drill instructors.
Oh, okay. So that goes.
Come here,
far back.
knucklehead.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That whole routine. But, it's interesting because I'm still friends with some of those people that I ran with, and we've all found each other through Facebook, and I'm in some punk rock Facebook groups, and I'm probably the most conservative looking out of most of them.
Yeah.
That I'm not saying that for any other purpose, because a lot of them are successful, but it's just one of those things where you finally fit in. But as an example, like someone would challenge you to do something that was anarchistic or off the wall, and being alcohol and black beauty fueled, which is amphetamines.
Yep.
And I used to break them apart and snort them, in the bathrooms at the clubs.
That's heavy.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother story too. But this is an example. I'm standing out in front of the Whiskey one night, and Black Flag's playing, and I couldn't get tickets for the first show. Whiskey always does two shows, a 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock. So unfortunately, the 9 o'clock show turned into a riot.
Oh, wow.
Maybe I had something to do with that. Yeah. But there was cop cars, going by all night because of what they knew. When Black Flag played, there was going to be trouble. And one of the other punks, this guy named Trent, who was part of the reason I got named Sweaty, because I was in the pit one night and he goes, "Damn, you're so sweaty." And it fucking sticks, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm standing there and he goes, "I'll bet you won't rip the fucking side mirror off that LAPD car." Well, what do you think I did?
Always that one friend.
And that's what starts, being chased and throwing beer bottles and, lighting a dumpster on fire and pushing it down San Vicente through, Sunset Boulevard.
Wait, you can't just roll right past that story without, wait, you lit a dumpster on fire?
I wasn't the only one.
Okay.
And the statute of limitations is up now, so
let's talk on it.
I've been lawyer cleared.
So we're talking about a green dumpster with the flap opens.
Yeah, full dumpster.
You just car bomb that thing and push it down the hill?
Yep. So, and that's what I'm talking about. It's that being able to push the envelope or be on the edge of getting into a lot of trouble.
You sound kind of reckless back then.
Yeah, and a lot of it was attention seeking.
Okay.
It's kind of like when you get your first tattoo and it's above the sleeve line,
off,
and you start wearing wife beaters so everybody can see your stupid tat.
Yeah, right? I did it too. Yeah.
And we all go through that where you have these times in your life where like I said, because of the adoption, I was looking for attention, but in a negative way.
You were seeking that home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you were to talk to some of the kids I grew up with who weren't punks, they would just say, "That guy was crazy." Mm-hmm. I pulled a gun out at a party once.
Oh, wow.
I pulled a gun on my sister once. I mean, stuff like that, that's just not normal.
It's not.
Because when I share about it in 12-step programs, people will laugh, but even those people sometimes say, "Fuck, dude.
Damn.
What up?"
Yeah.
But then there's a genre of that understands that because they went through, similar things. Adoption is a weird thing, and it does. There's a huge abandonment thing, and that's that could be a podcast on itself. But that's what fueled me into that knucklehead. I don't give a shit. Live fast, die young. I never thought I'd live to be 30. I was either going to, die in prison, die of an overdose, or kill
Someone's
myself.
Going to kill you. Yeah.
Kill myself. I mean,
So-
I was suicidal for most of my youth.
You know, that's a topic on its own right there, you know, suicide prevention and all that stuff. But the ripping the police mirrors off, the burning the trash cans and sending it down Hollywood Boulevard or whatever it was, the drugs, the alcohol, the rage, because that's really what's inside. It's just how you get rid of it. Where was rock bottom for you? Was there a moment in your life that you're like, yep, that's the spot. That's where it changed?
Yeah, I mean, you know, July 28th, 1992.
That's your sobriety date?
Yeah, that's, you know, after I got out of the Army, you know, I was doing nursing, you know, because of the medic stuff. And I met a gal and this is my first wife.
Yeah.
God bless her. She's a good person, but she was attracted to a complete nutbag, you know, because I was still drinking and doing drugs at that time. And, you know, I got her pregnant and we had a son and then we got married after that. And, you know, my son is the love of my life. And so the first year of his life, I stayed sober. And then I went to a fucking Bad Religion show.
Oh, no.
And ended up doing a bunch of coke that night and starting to drink again. And off I went again. And
Off the back of the wagon, huh?
yeah, and I think part of that is being 24 years old and not ready to be an adult.
Oh, man, yeah.
You know, so I was doing really well. I had a top secret clearance. I was working security at a naval base in the Mojave Desert. Now, the problem with being in the Mojave Desert is it's Tweakerville.
Yeah, there's nothing
they
out
were
there.
Cooking more meth out there than, you know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, being a speed guy, I like black beauties. I like amphetamines. And I'd been doing meth for a while prior to that, but I really got into the meth at that point.
You like to live life at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah. And my bottom was when this guy was, you know, saying that he was having, you know, extramarital affairs with my wife. And so I threatened him. And I found out pretty quick you can't make terrorist threats.
Yeah.
It's an offense.
It's a big deal.
And you know, when you're living on the edge and hanging out with gang guys and there's drug dealing and you know you may or may not be involved with, you know, some biker guys that are cooking meth and you know you're doing all this stuff and it finally catches up. And so, you know, I was lucky when I went to court. The guy that I threatened decided he was going to drop the charges, and I'm not going to say how that happened, but you know, people can get to people, right? And
happens every day.
Yeah. And so he dropped the charges, and the sitting judge that day happened to be somebody that I took care of his developmentally delayed, you know, kid, and so I got lucky, and they cut me loose, and I knew the DA had told me if I hear another peep out of you, you're gone.
Wow.
And then I kind of got put on the, you know, the radar, so to speak,
the watch list,
as being involved with these knuckleheads, you know, because I didn't look like a knucklehead then. I was kind of looking like I do now. And
incognito.
Yeah, I was laying low, but doing my thing at night and, you know, trafficking and whatever, but drugs, not anything else.
Not people.
No.
Let's make that clear.
So I moved away and I hooked up with an old Army buddy and he got me a job and I fucked that up real quick and tried to take on a couple of sheriffs with a golf club. And that was the end. I remember coming to on a gurney and I was handcuffed to that gurney. And just the looks on the doctor and the two nurses and the two sheriffs that were waiting for them to release me.
Uh-huh.
And, being in the medical field, I knew if I threatened to kill myself, they'd have to lock me down for 3 days.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. And
it's heavy.
I'm laying there on the gurney and I come to and the lights, you know, there's the fluorescence in an emergency room are just awful, right?
Yeah.
But they were extra bright that time. And I just had this, and I'm getting the chills right now. I had just this weird feeling that I was done.
It just stopped.
I wasn't going to do it anymore.
Wow.
You know, and I was what, 29 years old. And I had this premonition, you know, and you call it God or
power bigger than yourself.
Yeah. I mean, the lightning bolt hit me. Now, I'll tell you this, that lightning bolt didn't last very long.
Really?
Because I had a mountain of shit that I'd created.
Always do.
And my way of not dealing with feelings was to get loaded. And so I didn't get loaded again. I've been sober ever since then, July 28th, 1992, and 29 years old. But for the next couple of years, I had to undo a bunch of shit, you know, and by undoing it, it's by looking at yourself, you know, going through the 12 steps. And
that's a painful process for some of us.
You know, it was, but it was very freeing. And I'll go back to when I was 16. One of the things they had me do was go to 6 AA meetings. So I'd been.
You didn't give a shit then.
I'd been to meetings, and the Army sent me to rehab. I'd done all that stuff previously.
So in 32 years of sobriety, is there a challenge that you still see in yourself or in your day to day?
Yeah, and I think
to stay sober.
Not to stay sober.
Okay.
It's to have emotional sobriety.
You and I talked about that outside of this.
Yeah. And a lot of people may not understand that. So
explain that.
I'll try to explain it a little bit. Emotional sobriety means that I'm not going to hurt anybody physically. I'm not going to verbally assault anybody.
Yep.
I'm not going to give somebody gestures on the highway. I'm not going to put myself into a situation where I'm making more problems for myself, that I'm emotionally and spiritually intact.
Yeah.
And that takes a long time. It doesn't happen overnight. And it's learning to unlearn all those things that I learned on the streets, all the things that I learned, at a county jail. I mean, the non-service side of me.
So for 32 years, when did it click? Because I just hit 17 years sober on Saturday.
Congratulations,
Thanks, brother. I appreciate that. That's I'm proud of it.
It's a fucking miracle.
But it is a fucking miracle. Yeah. But I find myself, when you're talking about emotional sobriety, I still find myself so peaceful, so grateful, but so fucking angry too sometimes. And you and I sat in a car one day for about an hour talking about this. For other people out there, for our listeners that are happy, they're grateful, but they're still so angry with life, what would you tell them?
Well, it's...
How do they fix it?
It's called, in the 12-step program, we call it the spiritual axiom. When I'm upset about something, there's something wrong with me.
It's a me thing.
I'm off.
Yeah.
Now, someone may say, yeah, but, so-and-so cheated on me, or so-and-so did this, or so-and-so did that. I get that.
Pass the buck.
But it's, how do we react to that? And how are you dealing with your feelings in regards to that? And, I have a lot of AA friends, and what I do is I do writing.
Journaling.
Writing.
Okay.
I'm not a fucking journal guy. and because it always takes me back to, some
bullshit classroom.
No, some hot cheerleader doing her, diary at night,
So for the listeners, he doesn't do diaries.
Yeah. No, and I get that journaling is but what I do is I write poetry or lyrics.
Okay, cool.
Now I'm non-musical. I sang in a band at one time. I can't play music. I'm just not that guy, but I don't have that part of my brain that works the way musicians work, but I can write like a motherfucker. Right. Yeah. And I'll just give you an example. I wrote a song about adoption.
Wow.
And I sent it off to a buddy of mine that's a musician, and, I get a CD in the mail like a week later, and he made a record out of it. I mean, it's just stuff like that.
That's cool, man.
But my writing that's what I do is when something's bothering me, I'll write a poem, and then what I'll do is I'll put choruses in there and turn it into a song.
So you're digressing the negativity and putting it on paper. That's something that could help somebody out too.
Well, and then when I read it, it releases me of that, that anger, the grip that person may have on me. And then the other thing I do is I pray for their well-being.
Yeah.
Because if someone's jacking with me now, it's because they're sick.
Yeah.
Because you know me.
Yeah. It's hard to be mad at Rick Johnson.
I go to Del Tioman and get tacos, and none of those people in there speak English.
Yeah.
When I walk in there, the Mexican gals always go, "Here comes Smiley," because I go out of my way to make sure that people know that, I really do give a shit.
Well, and you do a whole hell of a lot, man. When it comes down to the things you've done in the community. I mean, you and I have worked together in a number of different places and stuff like that. But let me ask you this: you serve in the community. You do a lot of different things. You've been on boards. You've been MCs for major events. Your story, you told me, you're here because you hope your story can save someone's life. What does that mean?
Well,
because that's a bold statement, right?
when you're talking to a guy that was suicidal for a long time,
Yeah.
and I did overdose a couple of times, and I'm blessed to be here. I have had a gun in my mouth a couple of times.
Yeah.
I have had a rope around my neck.
Damn.
And maybe some of that was attention seeking. But I was, this close to making that mistake a few times. And, and that's why I do what I do now is I'm hyper involved in recovery, because if I can save one person with my story, and that's why I openly talk about being sexually abused on the streets of Hollywood as a 17-year-old kid in a blackout, because it doesn't have to be the end of me.
Yes.
What I tell people now is the worst things that happened to me, I used to think, God, I'm going to take all this shit to my grave, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I openly talk about it is because that's now an asset.
Yeah, you got to get it out.
And if you can do the work, as they say, and I would never say get over it, but get through it.
Yeah.
If I can get through all these things that happen to me, then it gives that other person that's happened to some hope. That, hey, if you've had this happen, you can be okay. Now that doesn't mean that I'm running around and doves are flying in my ass and there's unicorns in my life. Yeah, because I'll have those moments where I'll think about something and I'll go, man, I can't believe that happened to me.
Is there one thing that you can think of in all of your service work? You've obviously changed your own life. You've gone down recovery. You've been sober for 32 years. Is there one thing or a moment in time during your service work that you can say really changed your life? Like a certain event or a person or a place you were at where it reminded you maybe of, oh shit, that was me.
Yeah, I think the CASA
stuff.
Yeah, because what CASA does, obviously they, when a kid gets abused and they pull them from the home, they follow them through the system, and it's experiencing that moment when you're actually helping a child.
The impact is amazing.
Yeah, get through the system, and those are those aha moments when I go, thank God for the people that didn't give up on me, that were there for me during my worst moments. And one of them was Don Dewey. Mm-hmm. Mike Dewey was his son, and Mike and I were friends. Well, Don lived across the street, and he was probably the coolest parent in the neighborhood. And he was the one that sat me down after a lot of those things had happened to me as a kid and said, this doesn't have to define you.
Wow, that's powerful.
And at the time I was like, yeah, whatever, Don. But now I look back and I go, thank God there was somebody there that would listen to me, and he'd have a smoke with me.
Yep.
And and we'd talk about that stuff, and because I couldn't do that with my dad.
So if I hear you correctly, your story, the message that I'm taking away from everything you've been there, done that, seen that, got the T-shirt is, don't let it define you.
Ever.
Wow.
That's
heavy.
When people like I'll be at Starbucks with, somebody that's very Christian or whether, and I'm not putting down Christian people because, that's my thing too. But to a point, I'm not a church guy.
Yeah.
But they'll say, oh my God, look at that person's nose ring and hair. And I'm like, dude.
Judgmental bastards.
That used to be me.
Yeah, worse.
But I don't say that to them. I just say, hey, look, because I know that person.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, if you ask her what her deal is and maybe sat and talked with her, maybe you'd understand why she's doing what she's doing.
Communication's key, man.
Because that was me. I've had green hair. I've had orange hair. I've had mohawks. I've had Liberty spikes. I did all that, and look at me.
Yeah. Not letting I love that. I mean, I'm almost like speechless to even understand that in my own way, because I've never said that or even lived that. But now that I'm thinking about the way you're explaining it, that's exactly how I've been living in my sobriety. Not letting those things from my past define who I am and working my tail off to ensure that I adjust course, redirect fire, and change the legacy from my last name.
100%. And I think that's why there's this, bond between us, because
absolutely
we may or may not have seen stuff that,
most
other
people haven't.
Yeah. And, and it doesn't make us better or anything. No. It just makes us different.
Different journey.
And when you find somebody that's kind of on the same path, that's looking for that next, no pun intended, level, we want to level up. And, and I do get criticized by some of my old punk friends, but it's in a loving way.
Yeah.
They'll say things like, "Oh, dude, you're
so
look at you, you're
now.
wearing a suit now. You look like a senator or whatever, and
you kind of do."
But that's a fucking compliment.
Yeah, if you think
because
about it.
Let me tell you something about my parents. I was not their favorite, but I did both of their eulogies.
Wow.
And not because my sisters or my brother weren't deserving. It's because everybody kind of chose me, because they know I can get up and speak in public.
Yeah.
They know I will give 1,000%.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And I repaired all that.
When you refer to your parents, you're talking about your adoption parents?
Yeah.
So
biologically, I don't associate.
Do you know them though?
I tried to meet my mother and she wouldn't meet me, and that's
what
okay.
age were you?
This happened at 16 years of sobriety.
Wow. Oh shit. 16 years into sobriety.
Yeah. Thank God it didn't happen when I was drinking.
She just didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah. At the last minute, she backed out, and I don't.
That's a her thing.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Totally.
I don't know. I can't imagine how hard that must have been.
What about your biological father?
He's dead.
Passed away.
Drunk.
Did you ever get a chance to meet him?
No.
Never once.
He didn't know I even existed.
Oh, one of those stories.
That's a really long story.
Yeah.
He was a drunk and abusive guy, and so my biological mom took off.
Split, huh?
This is from Bakersfield. She took off, went to San Diego, and had me.
Yeah.
And put me up for adoption.
Like that.
So, and told everybody I was a girl to throw everybody off the scent. And that's okay.
So your adopted family picked you up when how old were you?
7.5 months.
Wow, dude. So like you were a brand new human.
Yeah. So, and this is for anybody that's been adopted. And I've done a lot of reading. There's a great book called The Primal Wound. I was actually taken home by my biological mother for 3 weeks, and she figured out she couldn't handle it. And I think a lot of that was the pressure from the new husband. So she took me back, and then I was put into foster care, another foster care, then adopted. So I had 4 different, it's like a joint being passed to 4 different people.
Yeah.
Well, if you talk to any, psychological therapy people, they're going to tell you that first, year of your life is really vital to be in one loving environment with the person that carried you in the womb.
You didn't get
regardless of how fucked up it is.
Yeah.
And I didn't get that. I got passed around. And so I have horrible abandonment and separation issues, which lead into the genetic predisposition from my biological father about being a drunk.
Yeah.
And then trying to figure out who the hell I am.
Man, what a story, Rick. I tell you what, dude, I have nothing but love and respect for you, dude. You may not know it, but at the end of the day, some of the questions I've asked you in the time we've spent together have really, truly made an impact on me, man. And I'm just grateful for you. I love you, man. I think, anytime there's those people in your life that if you need to pick the phone up and call somebody, the other person on the other end will pick it up. You're that guy, dude. So I'm grateful for you being on the show. This is the first one, so I think it went really cool. I think the synergy's there, man.
Can I say one more thing?
Please, yeah, for sure.
So I played golf in high school, and my dream was to win a country club championship and try to qualify in a U.S. Open.
Yeah.
Well, I won the Newport Beach Country Club Championship. That's the little vest I have on here. Punk rock golfer.
Yeah.
And then I lost to Patrick Cantlay in a playoff in 2010 for a U.S. Open local.
Wow.
So don't ever sell yourself short. If you have a bucket list, you can check all that shit off.
Hey, and I'll tell you what, for the listeners, man, I played golf with this guy, and I'm more of like a caddy than anything else. All right, man. I got a couple of fire for effects here for you.
Yep.
Who's your punk rock Mount Rushmore? Give me 3 or 4.
Oh, 1979 Black Flag.
Okay.
The Adolescents.
Okay.
The Clash.
Okay. I love those guys.
The Dead Boys.
Really?
Yeah, from Ohio. And they're a little more old school. The Circle Jerks.
Yep. Some people probably know them. They got pretty popular.
Well, they just played Coachella, and their singer said something he probably shouldn't have said, but that's all
Imagine
right.
that.
Yeah. And I don't fault him for what he said. It's just bringing that out publicly.
Right place, right time, right?
Yeah. And then, the Germs X. I mean,
you're a punk aficionado is what they call it, man. You're always listening to punk
music. There's bands like the Chiefs that not a lot of people have heard of that were very defining to me. Mad Society.
How old are you now?
62.
And this fucking guy still goes to concerts. So if you're not going to concerts and you're 35, 40, you better get your shit together.
And Mike Palm, Agent Orange.
Agent Orange, yeah.
And of course, I can't leave out Mike Ness and Social Distortion.
Of course.
Mike's,
pioneers, man.
And Johnny Two Bags, they both play. And, shout out to those guys. They're
best golf
course
you
led
ever
the
played.
way for sobriety for me.
Best golf course you ever played?
Oh, shit. I'd have to say Crosswater in Bend, Oregon.
Oregon?
Sun River, Oregon.
Second best?
Probably Big Canyon.
Where's that?
Newport Beach.
Man. And you probably shot like a 60-80 at both of them.
And maybe a little less. Yeah. I was a member at Newport Beach, so I tore that place up.
Yeah.
And then Pebble Beach. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that. But
yeah.
It's run by a bunch of, whatevers.
That's how golf courses are, though. Last fire for effect. You have a mantra or a quote you live by?
Yeah. What if you had a great life and didn't know it?
Ooh, we're going to end it on that one. Rick, thank you so much for being here.
Love you, brother.
I love you,
Thanks
and I appreciate
invite.
everything you got. You guys stick around. Again, this is the Battle Between podcast with my good friend and brother, Mr. Rick Johnson.